And this is Ganden. And yes, I am alive. Very much alive. I'm one of those people that just like to play games. I decided to try to start a channel to do something else. But for most part in my life, I played games until sometimes a dry heave. You know what I mean? I get really invested in games and I'll play it. So I started all of a sudden playing Age of Wonder 4. New DLCs and whatnot. It came out during the fall sale. And I just plowed through that like forever. And then I got really invested in As We Descend Update 4 when it came out. When it released Master of Command, some other stuff that I looked into. And I just didn't feel like making videos. It's a small channel. A long ways to go before I'm going to be one of those better channels. I might even never get there. Who knows? But I like Update 4 As We Descend, and this video is going to be about that. I'm going to go through as far as what the big new changes are as we descend. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cards, the new way you start, finally showcase a bunch of videos of just the cool things you can do with a new unit Orville, and also some of the stuff that you can do with Exosuit, which is not that different from before, but there is a little extra. They have changed something with the whole concept of the Mythion machines, and then we're just gonna wrap it up. So I'm gonna showcase and see so you can see and feel that stuff. But let's go through the new changes real quick. I'm not gonna be too ranty. I just want to showcase some of the stuff, but also explain how I feel about it. Okay. There are exactly one new unit and a bunch of changes to the existing card for units. So no major changes to the unit themselves except for adding the ore wheel, which is a weapons platform. And that's really how it plays. It's just smattering of shots. And it only really have one offensive capable thing, but it's pretty good at what it does. Perk-wise, it starts with this one, which is, and we're talking about the Votive now. I'm not going to go into Guild as much because Guild hasn't really improved. Sure, they added this unit to Guild, and the improvement is how you start the game itself. But in reality, Guild is still Guild. It's still woefully lack of attention to it, and it just feels like Guild is not that good. But that's just me. It might be different for others. So there's two new changes perk. Well, there's a bunch of new perks, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But for this one is when you empower it, anytime you use an offensive card, even including itself, and they only have one offensive card. Two, if you think about Guild, it has a special Guild card, but I'm not going to go through that. But anyway, it will attack. It will do an auto attack anytime you use a offensive card like the Lantern, or even any other, like an Enfeeblement card. It's technically an offensive card. That's awesome. And you will see a couple of strategies that I adopt with something I call Flurry Up, meaning that add your more flurry attacks that last for the rest of the expedition or battle, and then how the different strategies on how you do that relatively quickly. There's also another change, which is Empowered Flame. Now this is the worst change they have done so far in this one. And it used to be that you had what's called Empowered Inferno. Theory was this. You have two opposite lanterns for Votive. You have the Empowered Echo, which is to double off of your first non-offensive card, which can be a barrier card, it can be an empowerment card. You double up on the effect of it. And that's pretty good on protective way, and not to mention really empower your unit really quickly. Love that one. Loved it before, love it now. And then you have what's called Empowered Inferno, which preceded this one, where for every when you use the Lantern attack offensive card, it also gave all your units what's called Burning Weapon. So for a turn, the amount of attacks you did with it, let's say a 20 damage attack, you also got as a burning dot. So you could build up the burning really quickly if you had something that really can do this macros, like the Knight. It was effective. It still wasn't really enough because of the fact that you have to think about the Lantern. What really broke the camel's back when it came to usefulness of Empowered Inferno was update 3. And for the reason is that now you're down to you can only have 8 Lantern cards. And here's the thing. You need offensive cards, Lantern offensive cards, in order to get the Burning Weapon. That was before. So that meant that you have to find room for the empowerment cards, the special cards, the offensive cards, and barrier cards. 8 cards have to do all of that. So it was a little bit harder to start a fire, and you more or less taken away from your protective aspect of, say, the barriers. Not just because you could, with the Empowered Echo, do a double barrier, right? But it was that you could have fewer barriers cards now, because now you have to have a mix of offensive cards. What is the point of having something like Empowered Inferno if you can't set the fire? Now they changed it to Empowered Flame. So before, with update 3, it was a little bit of a difficulty. I wasn't really keen on it. But I thought that with the Orb Wheel, maybe that's a good strategy. Think about it. If you can just do multi-attacks, a lot of them, and you have Burning Weapon, then that could be a tremendous amount of fire dot. But it turns out they changed it to Empowered Flame. So now you have Fury Blade. And I do believe Fury Blade, as you can see, can only stack ones on a solo unit. Empowered Flame. So you can just get a little fire dot. Now, theoretically, with something like the Orb Wheel, that can build up. But you see, the Orb Wheel now have its own card that can do that, called Molten Lead or something like that. So it already gets a Fury Blade 2, which can then add that fire dot without you having to go through the bizarreness of doing an Empowered Flame. And there are multiple other units that have something similar, like the Burning Sword for the Knight, etc. So, Fire Blade is an awful thing, and there's no reason for you to take it. Before, at least, your head can have a massive fire dot that can equal the amount of damage that you were doing for a whole turn. It could matter. Now, it won't matter. Not in short run and not in the long run. Because if you really want this to be determinative of the outcome or doing damage, it's going to take forever. 10 turns of fire dot damage building up enough to actually matter, when you're most likely going to have slayed the monster long before then. So why would you compromise your ability to protect your units by just having an assortment, empowerment, and barrier cards for the 8 ones that you have? It's hard enough to pull them. If you have 4 units with all combat cards, and you have just 8 Lantern cards, it can be really difficult to pull cards that can help you. So having a double up of your barrier at that point might just be the difference between success and failure. And I have played enough games, even from Update 4, to realize that. So those are the 2 major changes. That one is an Empowered Barrage. Very good. Very good. And then this one is a lousy change to a kind of lantern card that you would never ever use. If you do, good for you, I guess. Now there are a couple of extra perks too. Like this one I haven't pulled yet. There might be a guild specific, who knows. But there are some changes, an additional perk. A lot more to choose from. But there are some unique ones for the Mythion machines. That is the way you now start with a Mythion machine. Before, you just empower the workshop, spit it out, and that was it. And it worked and functional pretty much like any of the other units, is that you have a bunch of open perk slot that you can do something, and it comes with a basic perk to start. However, now they have changed the dynamics. You start with its own perk, right? But you also get at least a level 1 perk. That is a unique perk like this one, Pristine Artifact. That is very awesome. So you get to choose 2 perks for every level you level it up. And how does that work? Well, you can now use artifacts or corrupt cores in order to make a Mythion machine. Before it was just corrupt core, but you can now use artifacts too. And when you have the opportunity of having built a workshop, then you now have an option of either leveling it up using an artifact or corrupt core, or building it. And you can level it up to level 3. That means 3 additional of these unique perks. And then once you're done that, you have a fully perked up Mythion machine. And then, of course, for every level, you get an additional card that you can pick from. So it's a vastly different way of getting a really awesome unit. Now, that all depends on how quickly you can get it. Obviously, you're not going to want to level it up if you're like late in the second cycle to spit it out, just to be able to use it for a few missions in cycle 3. If you then manage to get it really early, you can even build it at the very end of cycle 1. And that's pretty cool. You can actually use it in the major boss battle if all stars align and they have enough of the power rods. And that haven't changed. You have to empower the city twice, or power up using 2 power rods the city once, and then use 1 power rod in order to power up the workshop. They changed that to just 1 turn now. So now you have theoretically a chance to get it at the very end of cycle 1. Most likely you're going to want to level it up at that point, since you can only use 3 units for the first cycle 1 major boss, and then the mini boss after that is just 3 units too. So there's no real reason for you to do it. Furthermore, you can have up to 5 units if you want to. So how would that work? You start with 2 units. And then throughout the course of cycle 1 and 2, you pull 2 corrupt cores. Those are the ones that you need in order to get units. Since you can use also artifact for the Mythion machine, you don't need to use that last corrupt core that you get for getting the Mythion machine out. You can theoretically, through the process, get total of 4 units and then 1 Mythion machine. Just 1. And that might sound cool, but keep in mind you have to get comic cards for all of them. So even if you want 1 guy in reserve, it's very much redundant. I would assume that if they add additional levels to this, additional cycles, then sure, having 5 units might be the way to survive the more difficult levels after that. But as of now, there's no real reason for it. So you're better off just, if you get those power rods early on, that you just go through and power it up completely. So by you get to the expedition cycle in cycle 2, you actually have an orb wheel or the exosuit and fully upgraded. Level 3 to start out. So this is one of them that you can find. So this is how it works when you upgrade to one of these Mythion machines. You can upgrade to a total of level 3. It depends on the opportunity of adding those cores. This is an exosuit that I'm doing right here. You will always start with 1. So if you build it right away, you get 1 level. For every other level, you get another perk. These are unique perk for it, like adding a command point or adding better stats, like in this case, armor and hit points. And then you have other choices too, like this pristine artifacts that starts everyone with a 1 empowerment, except for the lantern. And then for the matching amount of perks that you might have, or matching and panel levels, you also get a card. So if you upgrade level 3, then it's 3 cards. Upgrade level 2, then it's 2 cards, etc. So it all depends on what you want to choose going forward. You will know this with a Mythion machines, however, you don't have that many choices. So I wanted to just show you how it starts now. If you remember from update 3 and below, you start with the Vanguard or the Ranger, depending if you play Votive or Guild, and then you have a choice. And it was usually a choice of 3. Now you start with a choice of 2, and then you get another choice of 2. So I can now start with the Dauntless. I don't have to start with the Vanguard. And then, yeah, I want to do Fire Maiden. Heck yeah. So there's your start of 2 units. Pretty neat, right? So now I don't have to suffer through the Vanguard, and I don't have to constantly sideline it. There's a point of use in Vanguard if you're doing more of an armor build, but in this simple case, this is perfect. And then, of course, nothing has changed as far as the actual different shops. They're the same. I haven't seen a major improvement here. So this, in my opinion, is just one of the best shops anyway. No question. Farm, still not worth it. It's expensive, and you can only make either a dream fruit or a super grub if you have enough strength every 3 turns. It's just not enough. You maybe get 2 each turn, and you have to commit an envoy for that period of time, and it's just not worth it. The cost is not the issue. The 80 copper is not the issue. I think it's just too long. If they made it more of a 2 turn, yeah, I could see that being the case. That can be good. And of course, you don't use the envoy for that whole period of time. That's just crazy to me, because again, it's a farmer. He's not telling you like, okay, you want me to plant super grub? Fine, you're gonna have to do it. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of silly. It should be just one of those things where you go and tell him, I want you to plant this, and then he does it. Takes 2 turns and whatnot. But right, that's just different tangent. But there you have the basic process of this. Now let me showcase you all the different cool things you can do with the orb wheel, because it's really a great unit. And I also wanted to show you how it looks like when you do the leveling up. So that's something that I'm going to show you too. And then finally, a summary. Just my thoughts about it. So I wanted to showcase here, for example, that you can have like 5 units if you absolutely want to. All you need to do is just spend all the corrupt cores on getting units, and then you can get a Mythion-unit too, using just artifacts. In this case, of course, you can't use 5, and it really doesn't make any sense. This setup sees your knight, and I have the ore wheel. I have, of course, Dauntless for armor, and the ever-present Fire Maiden. It's like with all strategies, when I use, in particular, Knight, I do want to use it plainly to be upfront, take damage, but also dish out. The nice thing with that is the whole empowerment. Now you notice that that one has the pristine artifact, which means it gives everyone gets an empowerment except for, of course, the lantern. The lantern, I do believe, is using that tech that empowers it. So that's pretty good. But of course, there's plenty of empowerment cards that you can use in order to power it up. What I did notice, however, and what they fixed is that if you happen to get the tech that makes it possible for you to empower it one more time, then you can use that cleverly to also do 2 non-offensive cards twice. Okay, so normally it's just one time, but if you have that one, you can go ahead and do it one more time. So I thought that was pretty cool. It didn't used to work that way, but they fixed it with this. And I appreciate that kind of feature itself. Now, taking care of these dragons or whatever they are is generally no big deal. As you can see, however, it's about to hit me with just right off the bat, a big juicy laser to my lantern. You now get half as much barrier out of it. Previously, you can have up to 80, and they were fleeting. I believe the barriers now are permanent, and it's a max of 40. I'm guessing they felt it was a little bit excessive with the major bosses that you had 80 barriers, so you could easily take a 230 plus hits to your barrier and not breaking a sweat, maybe on the third one. What I like about the orb wheel, and as you can see here, is that anytime I use something like an offensive card, it will fire. Now the strategy I'm using here is that when you move it up front, it will buff itself. It would give himself another flurry. Any offensive card you use at that point flurries that card up. Whether it sucks because it lowers your attack value, but anytime I attack, it will buff itself. Any auto attack phase, it will buff itself when it's up front. And then what you do is just move it back, and as you can see now, it has more attacks. Now, in this case, it's withered, so that's why it's like 5 times 2. But once you start building that up, that's pretty cool. There are, of course, ways for you to get more attack value. It has its own card called Fumes. It works by exerting all your units, and for every single unit it exerts, you get 2 in attack value. So that's one quick way of doing it. Yes, you get all your guys exerted, but just for one turn, unless you do it twice, 2 cards. And then you can also have attack cards that are specific to the lantern that have a card like that. And the Fire Maiden also have a card like that can give you, as long as everyone in the support line gets attack value. So there are several different ways. Oh, not to forget the Forgesmith. The Forgesmith has cards like that too. So in this case, I'm not going to have that much of an attack value on the knight because I really don't have that many armor cards except for what the Dauntless can provide. But I think, the real gem in all this is the orb wheel is just this constant attack. Every attack I use, it just fires. And the stronger you make it, the more flurry cards, the more of attack value you give it. It's just such a beastful mechanism. I think this is an older video where it doesn't showcase what they did as a change, and that is it has one attack card, and that will make an auto attack. However, anytime you use that one, it attacks twice because its own perk is that anytime you use an offensive card, it will also fire. So that's the interesting part of that perk, is that if you have built it up pretty good, that it can just simply keep on firing every time you use it. The really interesting part with this offensive card it has, is that anytime you use it, instead of putting it on your discard pile, it goes back to the top of your pull pile. And what that means is that if you use the recycle mechanism, and that is when you use the runic recycle to draw a new card, you can constantly draw that card. There are several of different cards like that that has that new mechanic, and I think that's pretty cool. That's a good addition. As you can see from this one, this will only have the level 1 because I got it pretty late. So it's not going to be one that has all that stuff. Now, said in the previous battle that I had that empowered the Prestige artifact doesn't look like it. I only have the one, the broadcast, whatever that is, that makes you draw another card. But you have cards like Revved Up that will give you more flurry, or it empowers you. So in this case, it got empowered. If you use it again, if you're empowered, that'll give you the flurry. And as you see, every time I use an offensive card, even if it's just that shoulder bash, it will fire. And here, of course, the annoying factor is those two backline ones. They often will web and that exert your lantern. And that makes it just everything more expensive to use. Normally, that illuminate would be just a 0 cost with 1 favor, but, you know, it is what it is. In this case, I have the shop that gives you really shitty choices, but one of them is those ocular, whatever that is, that gives you a little bit more retainer. It's a relatively cheap device to buy, so if I have the extra copper, I generally do. It can be useful to have more retainer. The only downside, of course, with the orb wheel, and that's just the way it should be, is that it starts with a 2 times 3 attack. Now I'm doing that thing again where I'm doing the whole flurry up, but for some reason I decided to just move it back right away. It was really dumb for me to do it. That was a waste since I have those. I have the free movement card, so I don't know why I've wanted to do that. It comes with these. It looks like a bike. Those 2 cards they're moving cards. They cost 1. The cool thing with it is that once you use it, it lowers all cards that you have in your stash to 0. So once you use one of those cards, of course, it goes back to whatever the full cost is. But it's one way to get some really expensive cards out to play a little bit more. It's well worth it. That one, of course, has guard break, I do believe, which is just the most annoying factor. Now, the scouting one I like because even though you only have 2 charges, is that if you put it on 1 unit twice, then you draw 4 cards. And there is some synergy there because there's a lot of different skills in some cards that depends on fixation. Like you have Obsession, which is a perk that will allow you to attack with a unit if you fixate something twice. But there's also other things that just provide you with some different synergies and strategies to go by. Man, I am just trying to empower everything that I can. One of the best cards, honestly, with the Fire Maiden is the 0 cost card that enfeebles. Anytime you empower a unit, it pops back into your hand. So if you discard it, it then pops back into your stash, so you can just use it over and over. If you have a strategy of, say, 2 or 3 different empowerment cards that you're going to use, you empower, you enfeeble, you empower again, you enfeeble again. It's just an interesting strategy to lower the attack value of an enemy. They added also something called refinement to being able to upgrade. So normally an upgrade would be like you upgrade any other unit. You upgrade it to a higher status. Generally you get a little bit more barrier. Maybe the prices change to 0. And you get some additional features on the unit itself. Now you have something called refinement. So in this case, you pay to upgrade about 10 copper, so you better have it, of course. And then you have something where you can, instead of doing an upgrade, you can do a refinement. Now, I don't know if you could do it once or twice. I haven't really done it that much to get the idea. In this case, I decided to just upgrade it because that becomes 0 cost. But if you refine a card like that, then it can become something like 2 in empowerment instead of 1. So that's pretty cool. And here I go into the same type of encounter like before with those stupid crab monsters. Not exactly a fan of it, to be honest. Especially now with the guard break, that is such a lazy, dumb feature, so just gonna have to deal with it. But the orb wheel is a good support line. It will always be there to just do multiple fire. You starting with 2 times 3. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it really pays off in the end when you start piling it on, so to speak. Like for example, a enfeeblement card adds burning and enfeeblement, and then if my unit there was empowered, it would then attack. Of course, Blade Storm is probably the best. Of course, you have to have more. As you can see, I'm not even empowered, and I don't really have that much armor. So that was more or less a waste of time or command points. Otherwise, if you have a lot of armor, you're fully empowered, you're going to do tons of damage. Tons of damage. Now at least I could empower. Now Lighthouse is a very nice card for the Fire Maiden because it empowers everyone except for the... so right now what I'm trying to do is just do what I call power up. That means I do a couple of attacks up front because it buffs up the unit, and it adds flurry for every attack that you do. I don't know why I moved it back without using an attack. I still have 3 command points. Sometimes I do really stupid things, to be honest. And that was kind of pointless at this point, unless, of course, I want to just empower the knight a little bit more. You know what? This is probably one of the few first videos that I did with the orb wheel, so I wasn't entirely sure about the process itself. But later on, when I have played it, I have made it more of a strategy to constantly ensuring that if I have the possibility of moving up the orb wheel, I will do so, and then just use as many non-offensive cards as possible while I do that, so I can use this buff up kind of thing that you're doing right here. Now again, I should just stay there, use as many offensive cards as possible, and then move back when I have the chance. But it works. It's a good functional strategy, and I've used it to good effects. I like the fact that the orb wheel itself is probably one of the best solo attacker. So there are a couple of late game, like cycle 3 or something like that, where you end up having to fight some really gnarly type monsters. One that, for example, can curse you, so you have minus 99, and if you get hit, then minus 99 in armor, you're pretty much dead, no matter how much barrier you have. The only way you can get rid of it is by moving. Well, the Orbital turns out to be fairly mobile because it has some movement cards that are pretty decent. And the fact that you then move up, you buff as much as possible, then you pull back, and you can smother off like, let's say, 6 times 3 in damage. That itself can really destroy entire unit. And the other part is that if you have the Firestorm or whatever that one is called, that you can just recycle through cards in order to fire it. Upgrade it at 0 cost. It do an auto attack, and then if you're have empowered your perk, then it will then consider that an offensive card and attack again. And then just recycle. It brings it back into your hand, and then you attack again. So it's just a great way of solo with a unit that can do some really interesting things. And as you can see here, 5 times 3, that's a pretty decent amount of attacks just with one unit. And all I have to do is just, attack with any offensive card, and it will attack itself too. So this is a fairly recent video. This is a great example why you want to solo. You have something like a perk option. And the one that you see there on the right, he can curse you pretty nastily. And in this case, I'm going to use my orb wheel naturally. And I also have one of the spring thing that can move it up if I absolutely have to. And Hailstorm, just start with that. This one doesn't happen to be an upgraded one. And it's just me firing. As you see, it fires twice. One as an offensive card, then for the perk itself. This one has, I do believe, the pristine artifact. So we'll start fired, empowered. And as to what you see right here, I keep on just recycling and flooring up. That's what I call it in a way. And now it's just a matter of getting a movement cards back. As you see, I have a couple of options here. I probably should have used the Hellstorm first. And that's just because that way I could have gotten another cheap flurry before I moved up. But whatever. It works. So that's 7 times 3. So it's going to fire 7 times 3, and then it's going to fire 7 times 3 again. In this case, it will just shoot at whatever. I don't think even fixation works on that, but I haven't really experimented that much with it. And here I go. I recycle, and then I fire again. And since I knocked that one out before it could actually curse me, I killed him in a couple of turns. So that was 3 turns gone. In this particular setup, I was playing with a Wayfinder. Not in this particular battle, but Wayfinder to start out. It can be a pretty good unit right now. It's just that it's very... it requires a lot of favor in order to activate all this stuff. Plus, I couldn't get the really good card that can give it like 4 empowerments to just begin. And here's your classic, just 2 of those crab monsters. One can guard break you naturally. And here is just a matter of empowering as much as possible. I do believe that I wanted some kind of empowerment cards that had like a barrier. And as you can see, that here's the dilemma when you start having a lot of units, is that you have to cycle through a lot of cards in order to get better cards or anything that, for example, has this barrier. Because once you start taking damage, and especially with something like armor shredding, that makes it a little bit tough. In this case, I seem to have fairly decent blend of lantern card that could allow me to pretty much get rid of that fairly quickly without having to worry so much about relying on the orb wheel. especially when you have decent amount of armor for your knight. It could be pretty good. Plus now, with some units like the Bombardier and the Arbalist, they also now have multi-flurry attacks, like auto flurry attacks, which can really boost your entire bunch of units. There was less so before, and it was more like the monk dude kind of thing. Right now, there's a bunch of good units that have it. I'm not a really big fan of this type of a counter. That guy fixates on whoever attacked it last, and it's a pretty big, huge attack that just keep on growing the longer the actual battle takes. And whoever is the last one that hit any of those two units are the ones that are going to get the mark for it. It also has guard break, of course. Everything from the smallest little squirrel-like creature to the larger have guard break. And once you get hit by that guy with guard break, then you can pretty much toast yourself. Not so much because the knight pretty much loses any ability to do any damage. And here again, you see the terrible nature of having to go cycle through so many things. And of course, I happened to get the Immortalize from my Dauntless, so that was pretty neat. I couldn't really use any of these other unit, and the reason is because if I try to attack, then what happens is that it's going to shift it whoever it's attacking. I moved it up because even if that, I don't know what that kind of thing is, a porcupine or whatever, that spiky yellow thing, even if it attacks me, it's not necessarily so damaging. But it really hurts when that guy jumps on you. And I didn't want to give that unit any other target. So here I am just flooring up, and I am limited to what I can use. What you can, for example, do is use everything else to attack with, as long as you save enough points. And here I made the mistake, almost. Yeah, I'm making still the mistake. Yeah, there we go. I finally decided, like, oh shit, I'm running out of command points. I need to use Clobber, if anything. And that's just so the ore build can then just continue to build up. And all I need now is just a movement card in order for it to move back. And that's pretty much whatever I want to do. Unfortunately, I ran out of Runic Recycler. And that means I'm going to have to get as much barrier as possible in order to, in this case, I can't really build up that much. That's just the downside to it. And I'm just trying to cycle through as much as possible to maybe get a way to move back. There's a couple of cards. Some are empowerment cards that add one of those movement cards. And there's also a host of other cards that you have with different units. But I had to take it. Unfortunately, that's like a third of the hit points of that unit for that pleasure. But now at least I can move it back. And as you can see, it's 9 times 6. That's really not bad. And now I'm using this exhaust fumes, which exhausts all the other units, but it gives, as you can see, 9 times 12. It gives me 6 additional attack power in this case. So I'm just going to Hailstorm it now. And I had 3 left in the recycler, so I could Hailstorm it, recycle, pull it back in my hand, and keep on doing it. So there's a lot of strategies there involved. And finally we have the Warlock Queen, or the Warlock. That's the final cycle, or the third cycle final boss. It's either the Genesis or the Warlock. This one is the nastier one. It has a lot of nasty tricks up his sleeve, including the Parasite. The only one that can remove the Parasite is the Purifier, and that's with the cleansing cards, but it has very few of those. So I would never suffer through using the Purifier, just a case of fighting the queen. I really wished I could focus on, you know, getting a better. I don't know if the lineup is the right word for it, but a better reason to use the purifier for it. You think it is the intended goal of it, right? And of course, I'm going to use Immortalized, an upgraded version that gives you a lot of armor to start. I think I just wanted to give it a barrier or something, but I really didn't have a choice to do so. And to be honest, I probably just should have moved up the orb wheel much earlier because it's not going to attack the very first time. But whatever is the case. And there's the parasite. You are better off just taking it because once it hits you, it's going to be lower damage than if you would not use the parasite. And you can't cleanse it away at that point. You then gotta take the full damage from the attack. And now you get infested with a much heavier attack. You can wait until after that has infested you to use a cleansing card from the purifier. Then you remove the entire effect. But, and I will say this, there's no real reason to take the purifier for the chance that you will have one or two encounters. One is this flying beetle thing that do that stuff. And then you have, what is it? Then you have the warlock. That's what I wanted to say. Now you need to knock out a total of 7 armor points there, like you see here. And I knocked it out. Now it will take full damage from any of your attack. And what I'm using here is both the Arbalist to do a lot of funky stuff with, and then of course I'm trying to Hellstorm it. Now this is just trying times 3 times 6, so it's not that bad. Exhaust Fume will make it a 3 times 12, which is not bad, but it's just 3 attacks, 12. But you can see it's pretty chunky, right? It doesn't have any armor for that stuff. So every time I use the Hailstorm, it will attack once, 3 times 12, and then the second time, 3 times 12. And now it's pretty much done. At this point, it doesn't have that much hit points left. And I figured, should I just Firestorm it to death, or should I let someone else do the job? And as you can see, with a good orb wheel and a good strategy, you can get a major boss like that pretty quickly, which is just fun. I didn't even have the full amount of cards for the knight, but I did have some good armor cards for the Dauntless in that respect. I barely used the Wayfinder. It was one of those cases when I had more units than I needed to. I should just be more patient and just get the 4 units, and I would probably have a full complement of cards and things like that. But there you go. That was a showcase of a number of different battles and some strategies involved in order to get the most out of your orb wheel, or for that matter, the exosuit. The real cool factor is the fact that you can add those levels to it, which makes the Mythion machine much, much better. And that one is just the best. Pristine Artifact is just one of the best one that you can give it. There are some other cool ones too, but that one, if you have an opportunity to take it, do it. Even though it costs more favor in order to just do it in every battle, you can compensate that by the fact that you start with everything empowered, and that's good enough. And there you have it. So that was a number of cool little battles that I've done. So you can see how you can move up with the orb wheel, that in the support line it will fire, and in the guard line it will buff itself for the new flurry. There are a couple of things that I wanted to also say that might not have been obvious. They have also added a bunch of debuffs. Some of them are awful, and some of them are interesting and okay. Now, we all know about armor shredding. I don't like it, but it is one of those things that you can build a some form of strategy against by adding more armor, right? It doesn't destroy all armor. You can add to it. And you definitely should if you can, because eventually go into negative and then it just eats up your barrier much quicker. But as a side note, you also have something called a spell. I don't think that existed before. I do believe the Warlock has it. That's the third cycle final boss. And what it does is just debuffs you. It takes away all your buffs. So if you have spent time and say flooring up or adding a lot of armor and stuff like that, it just dispels you and resets you. Now, I'm not entirely sure it can debuff everything, but you will notice that it happens to the old wheel. It loves debuffing it. You're back to the 3x2 in attacks in no time. And I'm not against it. I think that's actually one of those things that you're just going to have to compensate for because you have cards. You can do it. You can compensate for that happening. The worst one that they added was guard break. Now, I'm not sure if guard break existed before and they just changed it, but guard break is awful. There's two features of it that makes guard break the dumbest shit that they have ever added. And I'm sorry for using the S word, but I will because it's dumb. For two reasons. You cannot compensate for it. That's one. And it can last for longer than one turn. It just can stack up on you so you can have it 2-3 turns. So what does it do? Guard break will put your armor to 0. Period. It will stay there until guard break is gone. It doesn't matter how much armor you add to it, it will still be 0. Second, it adds as a 50% negative buffer on top for everything. So how you normally get your barrier half, this one seems to just take it off completely. So in addition to the whole guard break or setting it to 0, if you start throwing a lot of barrier at it, normally that barrier would decay half at the time. So let's say you have 20, the next turn it would be 10, etc. Unless you have a special unit like the Overseer or something like that. But here it decays pretty much to 0. So not just half, it's 100% gone. So the next turn, if you had a lot of barrier to compensate because you've seen then how they just your armor is back to 0, you want to then add as much barrier as possible. Nope. So they added this guard break feature, and it's just not on some. It's on so many. It is awful and stupid and one of the dumbest things that they have added in the game so far. You see, everything else, as far as a debuff, you have a strategy for. Armor shredding, add more armor. Okay. Withering, add more attack power or suffer through it. You can still attack something. But guard break just removes all your armor and there's nothing you can do about it. And then it also obliterates your barrier every turn cycle. And you take so much damage from everything. But the worst part is that it's so prevalent on so many units. And from the smallest to the largest. And it's a lazy challenge. There's so many other things that are challenging, but you compensate for it by using card strategy. This one you can't. I mean, you can throw a truck ton of barriers at it, but the barriers goes away. So you don't have a compensating factor. You're pretty much just recycle through as many cards as possible, and eventually it starts taking a bunch of damage, and it's not fun. So I really think that that was a bad choice to add that. I also would say that I'm not super keen on just having a choice of 2 when you start. I really wish that the first choice you have, what normally would be the Vanguard, that is at least 4 or 5. And the reason for that is very simple. Having Fortify means that you can get a unit that approximates some of the choices you want to make, right? That your strategy going forward is set right there. If you get a bad choice in the first and a bad choice in the second, now you have to bank on getting the right stuff in the end, like the third choice or the fourth choice, whatever. Setting a strategy early on also helps you know what kind of cards you want out of it. And having a little bit better choice gives you that breadth of strategy and tactics that you want to use to the very end. If you get two crappy choices, the chance is that you're not going to have fun. The worst thing that I ever played so far with the update 4 was a Purifier, which is a garbage unit, and I think it was a Fire Maiden, and both of them, fresh off the boat, so to speak, just did not do well. There's so few attack cards among those two, and they're so expensive relative to what they do, that it took twice as many turns to just cycle through cards constantly in order to destroy just the smallest unit. It was not fun at all. It was suffering on a scale that I can't even explain. And eventually I had to give up because once I got the choice for the third unit, it was just, no, this is just horrible. I didn't get the power odds. I couldn't really compensate with getting a good Mythion machine. I gave it up. It was just too much suffering. It was not fun. Having a little bit more units to choose from at the very beginning, that sets the tone. And you can see yourself going like, okay, I have this unit, an overseer. Well, maybe I should do some backline attack power. That's what I should focus on. That's what I should be looking for. If I start with a knight, well, that's easy. You start looking for things that supports the knight so it can do its big hits. Or if you start with, say, some support units, a bombardier, arbalist, then you can think like, well, you know what? What I can do is I can work with that, and then I get an exosuit as a Mythion machine. That way I have that one as a frontline unit, and these guys can be, the backline support. I've done that before. So having a choice of few more, it's okay if later on you just get the choice of two, but I think the first one should be a little bit more of a trendsetter for the rest of the game. Otherwise, I just gimmick it and just start over and over until I have a decent start. And that's not necessarily the most fun way of playing a game. It should be challenging in the sense that some randomness, but the first choice should be trend setting. Anywho, enough about that. I also feel that 8 cards for the lantern is just not enough. Especially when you start having like 3-4 units. It's such a blend of combat cards that many times you have to cycle through a fortune of cards and you have to take it on the nose. Before at least that, when you have unlimited lantern cards, you can get a good mix, but you didn't necessarily get the cards that you wanted. You maybe didn't get the empowerment cards, but you got a bunch of barrier cards. So now you're compensating until you can start empowering your units and they can start doing some damage. Whereas here, you can start with a truck ton of combat cards and barely any barriers, barely anything, and that's just not fun. Challenge is one thing. Challenge is about strategy, how to overcome an enemy and what it can do by having a set of cards that kind of fit that strategy and tactic that you have in mind. But if the only thing you do is just recycle cards in order to get the one single barrier, one single empowerment card so you can finally start doing things, you end up discarding so many cards in that process that you're not really playing the game as much as you're just trying to survive. And that's not as fun. Um, in that case, I think for every additional unit that you have over one, there should be one more card slot. Just to see if you can get the ratio that makes sense. Limitations are fine. It just should be in mind also as far as if you have 4 units, then there's going to be a lot more common cards. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to get a good blend going off. Now, there are a couple of cards you can start with that empowers. And there are certainly some cards that has empowerment and barrier. So sure, you can try to steer towards that with Lantern, but it's not always true. And I played enough games to realize that it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you're just going to have an awful time starting up a new battle against a mini-boss, and all you do is just desperately cycling through a lot of cards, and you have to put good cards on the side because, again, you don't want to lose half your hit points on one dude. That's because you can't find a barrier card when you need it. And that's it. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about. I want to showcase a bunch of videos showing off the orb wheel and the process on how to set that up. And it's actually a fun update. There are some things that I would adjust, but overall the update is pretty decent. And I would recommend As We Descend as a game, but also update 4 and the new strategies that you can put in place. It is interesting, though, that when I got the most ideal setup with the things that I absolutely want, it doesn't necessarily go so well because it has to do a lot with the cards that you get too. And other times when I have this goofy setup, but I have the orb wheel, then everything ends up centering around that. The knight is just up there taking smacks. He have barely any armor because I didn't focus on that. But I have the orb wheel, the arbalist, and the bombardier, and they are just blowing stuff to pieces. And it's fun. So there are so many new elements that are being added that makes this a good game that I can play over and over. I just wish there was more content. I'm not talking about necessary sacrosanct or build out guild, but more levels. I think while they're going through this, there would not be anything wrong with them just adding a bunch of levels with the existing bosses as is, so you can continue playing, 1 or 2 more levels, just more things to do while they're figuring out what more content. And as they go, they could then easily just add more tougher bosses, more things. Because right now it just feels like when you're starting to have the fun with a Mythion machine or whatnot, that's when it ends. And it's just like sad feeling. You know what I mean? But you have a great day. Fantastic life. Awesome weekend. I hope the fall treats you well. It's getting darker. Time change kind of sucks. But you know what? As I always say, until we meet again, adieu.